Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. I have a very special guest. Kirk Shepard is with us today. This guy really kind of needs no introduction. If you're in medical affairs, you know who Kirk Shepard is. One of the founders of the Medical Affairs Professional Society, so he's one of the main guys in MAPS. He's an MD with a tremendous industry background. I'm doing an introduction, although I'm going to have him do the introduction. But I'm just excited to have him here. And Kurt, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you, Tom, and thank you for that kind introduction. Yeah,
Yeah. So why don't you tell everybody, why don't you do your own introduction so that you can kind of say that in your own voice? And then
sure.
we're going to talk about, so the episode today is called Patience, Purpose, and Ethics of Progress, which I just think Kirk's the perfect person to talk about this with. So yeah, let's do a quick intro.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Well, maybe it's best to start back, maybe at Cornell. That's where I went to my undergraduate school, and I was brought there to, besides learn, wrestle, and play football. And I know you're a wrestler, right?
Yeah. Oh, hell yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. What weight class did you wrestle?
167.
Oh, wow. I was 160.
Wow, let's
Yeah.
go, man. Let's do,
Then,
we
and
might
then,
have to
but
have
then
a
I went to
wrestle off.
heavyweight. Tom, wait a minute. Wait a minute. I went to heavyweight then after that. So which was actually easier than 160 or
I'm
167.
sure.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So there I got my education, played varsity football, never made to wrestling during the whole time because I was injured every year in football.
Yeah.
But then went on to study medicine. I did my hematology oncology at the University of Chicago, and then went to the Cleveland Clinic and practiced for a few years. What a wonderful place to practice. I loved it. I was in the hem-onc department. Um, just had a great experience, but at the same time, I liked research a lot. And Cleveland Clinic believes a lot in a kind of a tripod of activity. One is research. The second one is patient care, of course, and the third is education. And it got to be too much to try and do all three. So actually, pharma sounded really good to me. I was doing speeches for them. I was doing studies, and one of the companies came to me. But I still like patient care a lot. And I was extremely fortunate that the company that came to me, I won't mention any names here. And by the way, these are all my opinions, none of my past employers. I want to do a
Mhm.
little disclaimer here. They allowed me to practice. They said, you can come on board and be the clinical development medical affairs person, and we'll allow you to practice in the university setting, as long as you get the university appointment, which I did. So for 10 years, it was the perfect lifetime. Seeing patients, then coming over to pharma side to develop drugs. It ended when this company transferred me to the headquarters, and there was no place I could practice that was close by. So that to me was an entry into pharma, and it was very patient centric because I was still seeing patients. And I
Right.
brought that perspective into the company, which they hadn't had before. So, and I was fortunate too, the first company I went with, which was a small subsidiary of a larger company, was very patient focused. They developed all their products from listening to the patients, listening to the pharmacists, listening to the MD. So from there, most of my emphasis was then medical affairs, which Boehringer Ingelheim was where I spent those years. They were very kind to me again. They moved me around. They moved me into commercial. They moved me into R&D. Then they asked me to start medical affairs in the US. It was not started back then. Now I'm aging myself a little bit because this was back in the end of the 1990s. So they gave me a tremendous education, realizing how important partnership was. Then I went to Takeda, head of global medical affairs, then into Baxter Baxalta. No problem with Takeda. It's just they offered me, let's spin off a biotech. And we did. We spun off Baxalta. There I was head of global medical affairs again. And that was great until we were acquired in 10 months by Shire. Didn't
Mm.
last very long. And I like Shire. It's just that they were divesting oncology, and I'd always had oncology beneath me. So then I went to AZI, spent 7 years there as chief medical officer for oncology. And then in August of 23, I retired from there. Their emphasis was mostly around Alzheimer's at that time. A lot of research, a lot of effort being put into that. And I went to a biotech where I'm at now, which is PDS Biotechnology as chief medical officer, which I wanted to do my whole life. I had to wait till this time to do that, to go to a small biotech. So that's been very, very exciting.
Amazing.
So that's kind of it in a
Amazing career.
nutshell.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow. I mean, that's like I said, guys, excited to have Kirk here. He's just an amazing career, amazing guy. And we got a lot to talk about. But before we get into that, I want to talk about OVN. So this
yeah,
episode is being sponsored by the Oncology Voice Network, which is another organization that Kirk founded. So do you want to talk a little bit and just explain what that is for
sure.
folks?
Yeah, and I guess I should go back between Baxalta and going with AZI. We started MAPS, Medical Affairs Professional Society. That was
Right.
Ramin Fairhood, myself, and Travis, who was the CEO. Started with 100 people. I think you were maybe there. First meeting, we were a little nervous about that, but as you know, it's quickly catapulted to close to 14,000 members worldwide now.
Amazing.
So with that, that was focused mostly around medical affairs. We had the idea a couple of years ago actually to write a book and to have a book. Am I allowed to show it?
Yeah, show it. And for
Voices of Oncology.
those of you want to
Voices. Is it
check
in
it out,
focus?
it's on YouTube. Actually, come close. You got to move it a little bit because we can't see it.
Yeah.
Move it over towards your
There you
left.
go.
Keep going. Keep going. There it is, right
There you
there.
go.
So check
So
this out
that
on
was
YouTube.
just,
It's called Voices of Oncology. How do you get
yep.
that book?
So that is, it was just launched the ninth by Forbes. It's on Amazon now. We're very happy to say that we're number one in 4 categories for Amazon already
Wow.
after the pre-sales in August. In oncology, it just went to number one for oncology book launch. So the idea was to bring people together. There's 30 some experts in oncology, all different disciplines, and talk about how do we become better partners? How do we break down the walls so that you learn more about me, I learn about you, and we become better partners as far as drug development and hopefully save time.
Hmm.
Similar to the Apollo 11 mission, where everybody came together, broke down walls, changed the rules. And so that was the purpose of the book, which I'm very, very thankful to the experts that we had. These 30 experts are my heroes. And so they're in all diverse disciplines from R&D, CMO, CEO, commercial. I mean, I can go on and on with all the disciplines we had. With that, though, they started giving us feedback. Well, is it going to stop here with the book? We should have a platform where this could be discussed, bring people together. And so that's what Oncology Voice Network is, OVN, using the backbone, the foundation of the book for people to come together. There's sources of information there, there's interactions planned for a number of the disciplines. So not just around medical affairs, but all the disciplines together. And we plan to have podcast series like this one, as far as bringing people together. A lot of times, maybe not an individual person, but maybe 2 or 3, and how we work better as far as partners. So that's OVN. You can go to that. It's kind of halfway in the beta phase right now, moving out into being up and running. And it's oncologyvoicenetwork.com if you go online.
Check
And
it
the
out,
book
folks.
available through Amazon. Yep.
Check it out. Get the book. Check out the OVN on online, and yeah, and we're excited to partner with you guys. So yeah, so
We
we're
are
going to get
too.
into this
Yep.
conversation about patient's purpose, ethics, and ethics of progress. So, Kurt, let's talk about and let's start with how can patient voices be authentically integrated into clinical and strategic decision making, not just symbolically, but in ways that truly influence outcomes.
I'm glad you said authentically because there's so many, almost all companies say we're patient centric. We're all
Right.
about the patient. And then you look to see, well, where's the meat behind that statement? Why are you guys any more patient centric than another person? And I was fortunate to be with companies that truly were patient centric. When we started at Baxalta, it was that way. Shire was that way. And certainly AZI was that way. Uh, Actually, their CEO wrote a book on how to become closer to the patient and use their input in developing products. And it was a whole program for us. So I think the first way is that it's just not a promotional advertisement piece, but it really is interaction with the patients appropriately. And you have to know as far as what is appropriate interaction with the patients,
Mhm.
but all the way from establishing patient councils, for instance, as far as having people advise you as far as the success or lack of success of what you're doing, having feedback mechanisms from the patients, where we did surveys and focus groups, really making them a part of our company and our decision making. And the other thing is very important is making them actually a part of your research guidelines and your processes. And I think we'll probably talk a little bit about that later on. I think we're going to ask me a question about in the next 10 years, where do you see patient involvement going with research? But that's extremely important. Having them built into review of protocols, writing papers, et cetera, et cetera. We can go over some of the specific stuff later. That is really where the meat comes from, because they are partners, again, with the disciplines that are forming these studies and doing drug development. And I might add, there's a chapter in our book. It's not all about pharma leaders and executives, on patient and patient advocacy. So all these partners are very, very important to getting a drug to the finish line.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so as science and technology advance rapidly, especially now with all the technical advancements, how do we ensure that progress remains both ethical and patient-centered?
Yeah, I mean, everybody is trying to find the proper ethical framework for that patient involvement. You have to be careful. We were actually told in my early practice that you shouldn't be involved with the patient directly. There should be a learned intermediary, as they used to
Mm,
call it. That was the physician treating the patient. Now I think that's become more relaxed, perhaps with better processes around that to protect the patient and also the employee. So ethical frameworks should be developed. But again, I go back, actual patient involvement and the things you do as far as your processes, as far as research, are extremely important. That voice is there as you are doing everything, all the steps of research, and then bringing in other disciplines with you. It's
mm.
not just R&D or medical saying, okay, well, we got to get a patient in here to tell us if we're doing okay, give us some feedback, but it's bringing all the disciplines in together again, the partnership, because their perspective and what they hear from the patient, what they want to hear from the patient is different. And you need to bring all that into focus for all the partners. Um, there's also an important thing too, is that we need to be very, very aware of equity as we move with the patients. There's so much effort being put into making sure we reach all the patients, especially with new technology. For instance, you and I put together an educational program for some type of cancer that goes online and it gets an award. Yet there's a significant percentage of our people who don't have internet access.
Mm.
There's a significant percentage who can't even get online, know how to do that. So it's those type of things too. As we develop technology, we need to make sure that people are able to access it. And the other thing is to afford it. So in other words, patients giving us feedback saying, is this affordable? Is this accessible to me to make me a part of the process?
So do you think is there, let's talk about that issue of access and equity right now. It sounds like there's a real shortfall there. And is that more so in oncology, or what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think the access to certain parts of oncology, whether it's care or it's even part of the development process, is maybe be something that's put more in the forefront.
Mm,
You have the very obvious shortfalls of screening for patients, screening that should be routine for all of us. Yet there are certain populations that are not able or educated on these screenings, like colonoscopies. It makes me very sad to hear somebody dies of colon cancer and they have not had colonoscopy. It's a progressive disease. It starts as a polyp, it goes to a cancer. This takes years. That's why we do colonoscopies, to diagnose it in its stages before it gets to cancer. Breast cancer screening, cervical cancer, as far as HPV, et cetera. All these things are lacking a balanced access in a lot of populations. And so we need to make that better. One of the parts too that is obvious as far as the balance is not there is even participation in clinical trials. Now, participation in clinical trials for all populations is really lower than it should be. I
mm,
mean, it's anywhere from some people say like 8 or 9% up to 15% of all patients are involved in clinical trials. And
mhm.
actually, very good care is given in clinical trials. They get a lot of attention because of the protocols and the attention to the outcomes. But when it comes again to the populations, Some of the populations have half of that. So in other words, you have the African American population, which is probably around 3 or 4%. And there's reasons for that. It's not just the access, but there's a mistrust there, I think, from the past, as far as the way some trials have been run and a lack of communication. So these are things, again, that the lack of resources, the lack of sensitivity, the lack of training are causing us to have a shortfall in cancer, which, back to your initial question, I think it's more obvious in cancer than in other fields, because there's nothing more disturbing to hear somebody who wasn't diagnosed with cancer when they could have been by screening, didn't get the proper care, and yet they succumb to their disease, which is really catastrophic in cancer because it usually means death.
Right. Let's talk about diversity of thought and how essential it is for development teams. And
Mhm.
how can leaders create an environment where all perspectives are heard and valued?
Yeah, that's a bit of a tricky question, because when you talk about diversity, well, what are you talking? Are you talking about race? Are you talking about culture? Are you talking about those nerds versus the ones that are really social over in the other corner? It's all of those to me.
Mm,
I think when you go forth looking at how do I get diverse thought, diverse discussions, decision making into our team, all those things should be considered. We're looking for diversity, not just as far as a percentage of certain minorities or whatever, but it's think about who is going to add perspective to the problem solving, to the decisions that we have to make. And there has to be also an acceptance of that. Not everybody is accepting to diversity. A lot of people like it when they're in the same room with people who just like them and have the same opinions. And so we need to educate them, to have them have the experience that having people in the room with different opinions, knowing how to interact with each other, has a really fruitful endpoint. And that takes time. That's something that teams just don't throw themselves into and say, okay, well, we've developed this highly diverse group here. We're going to go forth and develop drugs. So it's a long process. But I think in the end, it pays off immensely, than not having people who agree to everything, who are exactly the same.
yeah, and I think there are different opinions, there's different priorities, there's different goals. So how do you personally keep purpose front and center when you're facing the pressures of deadlines and data and then corporate objectives and priorities?
Right. It's sometimes difficult, but it's got to happen. And I think the way that happens is, at least it has been for me, is you be clear on what your purpose is.
Yep.
You be clear on what your ethics and what are important to you as far as prioritization. And that way, if you ever start to slip away from that, and you've already talked a lot with your team about that, they'll catch you. They'll say, Kirk, this is not what we've heard from you in the past. And that needs to be done repeatedly. I think there's a lot of value to forming visions and missions. Okay, a lot of people go, oh, okay, yeah, right. You form those, you put them on the shelf, nobody ever looks at them. It's true. But the way you look at them is, my groups have done recurrent revisions of the vision and mission. Even if maybe you think in your mind, we really don't have to do that, but to bring it back up again and discuss it and to make it a material part of what you're doing for that quarter. Let's say it's the beginning of every year, you're going to revisit that, makes it come alive again, makes it adapt and change to what's occurring in the scientific and technology community, which is moving very quickly right now.
Right.
So, but for you, I know, as far as leaders, myself, you got to walk the talk. And that way, too, a lot of discussion about it, bringing it forth, choosing your priorities visually in front of everybody else, according to those ethics, is very, very important.
Yeah. And you said it before. You said that everybody talks about patient centricity, but
Yeah.
not everybody, follows through with it. So I'd love to hear from you if you could share maybe a specific moment where there was patient feedback or a patient story that influenced the direction of whether it's a project or maybe a clinical decision.
Yeah. I mean, I've got a few of those. I'm trying to think of a couple here that well, one was, and it was very patient centric. We were working with a patient advocacy group with liver cancer. And
Mm.
liver cancer, is a very serious disease. People succumb to it all the time from having cirrhosis first, usually, and then going on to develop cancer. But once you get the cancer, it can be cured if caught early. But the treatment for those that are more advanced is more sequential as far as involving a lot of disciplines. And it can be very, very confusing to the patient. So we were going to work, and we did a lot of work as far as the roadmap of making it clear to the patient, educating them on every step of the radiation, and then perhaps bringing the radiation therapist, then bringing the chemotherapy person, so that they understand the whole path. So we did all this work, and the feedback we got from the patient's wife was, you guys aren't paying enough attention to us.
Mm.
What he just said is not right. I was in the room, I heard it. He was worrying about his cancer. You need to talk more to the families and the caregivers. And to me, that was a moment of realization. She's right. We're
Yeah.
always directing things towards patients. We're always patient centric rather than family, caregiver centric also. They need to be partners in the patient's care. That's one. The other one was a little bit more unusual. In the beginning of my career, we had a drug called dronabinol, which is a oral THC, like marijuana. And it was being used for anti-emesis for chemotherapy. Pretty successful. I think we've got better agents now, but it's still, for certain periods, very good. But the patients started coming back to us with HIV that they had been given perhaps dronabinol for another indication, like nausea and vomiting from the therapy they're getting. And they said, I've gained weight on that product. You should look at dronabinol as far as treating AIDS wasting
Oh.
and appetite stimulation. Well, we did just that. I mean, we pivoted, went towards it. That was actually the first official approval before nausea and vomiting and chemotherapy was appetite stimulation in patients. And that's because we listened to them. I mean, some of the people first heard that said, oh, wait a minute, these people, they're like probably marijuana, junkies and just telling us that they want to get access so they can gain weight. But when we did the actual study with the FDA, it showed that it was a benefit because of people listening to the people who were saying this works in this problem.
It's a great story.
Yeah, it really it was fascinating. We were very cautious about it because it was a controlled substance, so we had to be
Right.
very careful about how we advertise it. And also, when we knew we had positive results, we couldn't go out and say that. That's always something that's troubling. You can't really go out and promote to patients before you have the FDA approval. Yet there's some patients who need the drug. So, but it did get to them and it did help.
I mean, I hate to make this correlation, but it's probably how Viagra like really made its way into ED, right? It's like, hey, taking this for my heart issues, and hey, oh, by the way,
Exactly.
got a little surprise.
Look at how often that happens. Yeah, that is amazing. And people said to me, well, Kirk, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say that a marijuana derivative is going to develop the munchies and you're going to gain weight.
Yeah.
But still, we listened and we actually officially got it approved by the FDA.
Well, I want to ask you about some science and innovation. So, like, looking at that, like, how do you balance this drive for scientific innovation, um, but still have the responsibility to maintain empathy and compassion and patient dignity at the same time?
Yeah, and that's something that's gotten a lot more attention in the past decade or so. Before it was all about science. It seemed like to me, at least where I was working, we would listen to patients, but it really wasn't taken with care. And I don't think we are actually as good at it. I mean, I was trained as an MD. I was trained to be empathetic to my patients. And then when it came to research, you thought, well, it's a little bit different. We were empathetic, but they were, a different relationship than you as a physician. And I think that has really advanced. The one company I worked with, which I mentioned already, as far as talking to the patient, listening to the patient, putting the protections around it so we do it appropriately. We don't mention product. We talk about what's your life like with this disease. That was tremendous training. It taught us how to communicate with a patient and listen, not about product, but what's going on in your life. What's the biggest thing that we could do as a pharmaceutical company to help you and your family out? So I think in that way, Tom, the sensitivity for that kind of communication and the more relaxed attitude about it of being able to talk to them, particularly you see it a lot more with rare disease. Um, but you have to do it appropriately. But I think it's really a direction a lot of people are heading as far as getting better drugs developed through listening to the patients and their families.
And that leads me to the question you alluded to before, which is when we look at the future, especially in oncology, what role do you see for patients as active partners in oncology innovation, let's just say, over maybe the next decade or as we look into the future?
Yeah. I mean, to me, this is a very exciting area. First of all, just a general statement, patient and caregiver involvement is going to become greater. I think all companies are agreeing to that. Some of the ways, specific ways, which are fascinating, is even setting your research priorities in the beginning when it's still an early product or you're doing early research. Teaching patients about that science, and a lot of them are very intelligent, they understand it, and say, well, I think you should develop this or that. So that having them involved in the very beginning, then also as you involve them in later things, they're more educated. They've actually felt as if they've helped to grow this drug. The other thing is, and this has happened now for, I think now a few years with most companies, is your protocol development. Actually bringing them in and say, okay, here's our study for the treatment of this solid tumor. How's it look? And they look at it, and a lot of times they're saying, well, it's missing quality of life measurements. It's missing this portion of what's really important to us as patients. And then taking that protocol and developing it into a synopsis that people understand. So in other words, describing that study to patients so they understand when they perhaps are in a clinical trial what it's about. Funny thing is, I've talked to some of my MD friends, oncologists, and a lot of them like to read those patient synopsises or the patient summary of a publication more because it gets right to the point, but in
Mm,
very simple forms, no nonsense, here it is. So this is really a big area, not only in protocol development, but as just mentioned with scientific communication. You'll see more patients writing their own papers, in fact, even being maybe a co-researcher, being put on the review boards of the papers before they are submitted for publication. And then that's being done, I think, by a lot of companies right now, where you see maybe more activity in the future is actually having trial steering committees that involve patients, like we have usually with physicians or experts in that area. And that's becoming huge. Also, they're consulting on patient information. Is it understandable? Is it, effective? And another one that's really becoming big is social media.
yeah,
What do you think of our social media interaction here? Is
yeah.
this reach you? Is this important stuff that we're doing? And they can help to create that with you. So those are just some of the ways that see patients being involved in almost every step of R&D and drug development. Patients will be involved.
And I think it's probably a lot easier now because of the internet, because of Zoom, because I mean, think about it. You have sick patients that, they're not going to be getting on a plane and flying to a pharmaceutical company to have interactions with leaders.
No,
But and you certainly could have done it by phone at some point, but being able to have and most people, like a lot of people, I should say, um, are familiar with having Zoom meetings and interacting online and filling out surveys and providing information. There's segments of the population, as you mentioned, that don't have access to
mhm,
that sort of thing, but
right.
I think that the ability to communicate with the patient has made a big difference in the, patient involvement. You agree with that?
Oh, I agree completely, Tom. It made it so much. It's taken the walls down of people having access to either these advisory groups or councils of even going to scientific meetings.
Yeah.
I mean, some of these meetings are held in Europe or, parts of Asia. For some from the United States, it's going to be impossible for them to go, but they can, as you know, there's remote recordings of a lot of these sessions that a lot of people can participate in, along with the advisory groups that go along with those. So I agree completely with that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. So last question. So when you think about your legacy, obviously you've had an amazing career. And the future of oncology, what does ethical progress mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, ethical progress, it's an important phrase because we are moving so quickly, and it's something that could be easily left behind. And it's actually even part of the book we just wrote because each of those disciplines are moving quickly ahead.
Mm.
And if they don't talk, if they don't try and partner better, then it's going to be more siloed and more difficult, I think, in the future for people. I mean, you look at what IT's doing, you look what medical's doing as far as AI, all this stuff. We need to talk together, and in oncology, particularly when time is just of essence. I mean, there's a possibility with a fast track approval of a cancer product with the FDA, which can occur now with our tours in less than a year, in 4 to 5 months. If you're not ready to go as a company, if you're not partnering and understand each other and educating other people on what you do as far as cancer research, it's not going to happen. So I think that's the greatest legacy I've worked on as far as the partnership, understanding each other. When I was at the past company I just mentioned, our theme was partnering into a new world because it seemed like all the disciplines were going into a new world. At that time it was this digitalization, now it's AI, et cetera. I mean, I could go on and on. We have to stay together as partners and communicate for the good of the patients.
Awesome. Kirk, you're the man. You're the best.
Hey,
Appreciate
thanks.
you. This was as
Yeah.
fun as I thought it would be. And hey, guys, definitely check out the book and check out OVN, Oncology Voice Network, and MAPS. Let's not forget MAPS. I'm a big fan
For
of the Medical
sure.
Affairs Professional Society. If you're not a member,
Yep.
or if you haven't checked out some of their programs and conferences and they have regional programs and training programs. So, check it out. And Kirk, we'll have to do this again.
Hey, I look forward to it. Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you,
man.
Tom.
Guys,
Right.
as always, thank you for joining us. If you got value in this, please share it with your friends. And as always, I appreciate all your support. Love you guys. See you next time.
Bye, Tom.